Haven't all the talks been amazing?
That was pretty good. We're going to get louder. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm so grateful to be invited to the Happiness and Its Causes conference. This is my second time at Happiness and Its Causes and in the beautiful city of Sydney. Last time I was here, I brought my 10-year-old daughter with me, and now she's about to turn 17, so time flies. And so I am delighted to share my research on happiness with you. I'm a full-time well-being scientist. I hope that you'll find it interesting and informative in your work and in your personal lives. I can't promise that I'm going to make you all happier, but I promise that I'm going to arm you with a great deal of information. So this is my book, The How of Happiness, that a lot of this talk is based on, and a list of the collaborators that I work with in my research on happiness. So during World War II, aviation experts deployed a lot of energy and resources studying military planes that went down. And one day somebody asked, why don't we study the planes that stay up in the air? And I think this is a really apt metaphor for the research that I do and that my colleagues do in well-being science. We study why happy people are happy, why healthy people are healthy, and why successful people are successful. I believe that all of us want to be happy. We don't all define happiness the same way. We might pursue happiness differently. But in a sense, everything we do in our lives is aimed at achieving greater happiness. Now, in the Western world, in Australia, Western Europe, United States, Canada, there's a lot of emphasis on happiness. You might think that in other cultures, that might not be the case. So in Asian cultures, for example, it might be considered arrogant or maybe selfish to be seen as pursuing happiness for yourself. So researchers have actually asked these questions. They've gone around the world and asked people, how important is happiness to you, sort of as a life goal? And I'm going to show you the results for the United States and a few sample countries, including Argentina, China, and of course Australia and Germany and Greece. And so on a 7-point scale, people from the United States rated happiness as really important, like a 6.6 out of 7. But let me show you what the other countries reported. So also really, really high sort of ratings of importance. Actually, you'll see here that people in Germany and China actually were significantly different. So they rated happiness as a little bit less important. So maybe a 6 on a 7-point scale as opposed to like a 6.5, but still very, very high. So still the evidence shows that most people around the world want to be happy, want to be striving for happiness. I actually was born in Russia. I came to the United States when I was 9 years old. And in Russia, it's considered, they don't talk much about happiness. So it's considered important to suffer, all right? So suffering is important for building character, right? And for maybe gaining spiritual salvation in the next life. But even in Russia, if you ask parents, what do you want most for your children? They'll say, I want my children to be happy. So, you have to kind of ask the question the right way. So most people around the world want to be happy, but is happiness a good thing? Some people think that happiness is all about pleasure and feeling good. Is it more than just about feeling good? Well, two colleagues and I tried to get an answer to that question by doing what's called a meta-analysis. So a meta-analysis is like an analysis of many studies. So we looked at 225 studies on happiness, and what we found was that happy people are more productive in work and more creative. And I'm going to go over some of these results a little bit later. And that happy people make more money and have superior jobs. Now, these are longitudinal studies, these are correlational studies, and experimental studies. And so, of course, the causal direction can go both ways. So money makes people happy. We know that, at least to some extent. But also, happier people make more money sort of later in life. Happier people are better leaders and negotiators. And people who are happy also more likely to marry, have less likely to divorce. So in one of my favorite studies, researchers looked at yearbook photos of college students. It was a women's college in California. And they looked to see if the photos showed Duchenne or genuine smiles. And so people who are happier are more likely to have the sincere, genuine smile in their yearbook photo. And they found that women who had these genuine smiles in their yearbook photos at age 21 were more likely to be married at age 27 and had more fulfilling marriages at age 52. I mean, isn't that amazing? Sort of the smile that you show in your yearbook photo in college predicts how good a marriage you're going to have 30 years later. So you might all go and check out your yearbook photos to see if you're happy today. Happier people also have more friends and better social support. They're healthier. And again, I'm going to get back to that later. They even live longer. Happier people also are more helpful. So this kind of counters this idea that happy people are kind of selfish and focused on themselves. It's actually people who are sad and depressed and anxious that are more focused on themselves, because it's sort of adaptive when you're not feeling good to try to focus inward to figure out what the problem is. When you're happy, in a sense, you have the luxury to not focus on yourself and to focus on others, to give more to other people. Happier people are also more resilient. So what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit more detail about some of these studies, because I think they're so important. So let's start with physical health. We've been talking about physical health at this conference, how important it is, not just to the individual, but to their family, to the community at large. So there's lots of longitudinal studies in this area. So what people do, researchers do, is let's say you are all involved in a research study. I would measure your happiness right now. I would give you all a questionnaire and ask you sort of how happy are you in general, relative to your peers, how satisfied are you with your life. And then I might come back in 5 years or 10 years or in 30 years and ask you a lot of questions about your health. Well, first, determine whether you're still alive, and have you had a heart attack? Do you have diabetes? How much pain do you have? How often do you get colds? And so these longitudinal studies are able to see if happiness today predicts how healthy you are in the future. And so I'm going to show you some of the results of these studies. So people who are happy at one point in time have been found to have a lower incidence of stroke 6 years later. This is true especially in men, and a lower incidence of both coronary heart disease and ischemic heart disease 10 and 15 years later. If you have heart disease, you're more likely to survive it up to 11 years later if you're happier. If you have lung cancer, you're more likely to survive it 3 years later. Happier people are less likely to be on disability up to 11 years later. This is a fascinating finding. Happier people are less likely to die in a car accident 8 years later. Not necessarily to be in a car accident, but to die in a car accident. So it could be they're more likely to wear seatbelts or more likely to focus on driving. And happier people live longer. They're less likely to die sort of any cause up to 28 years later. So why is this? So you might imagine maybe when you're happier, you have better health habits. You're more likely to go to the doctor. I already mentioned wear seatbelts, exercise, eat healthfully. Maybe your immune system is boosted. So all of these hypotheses have been tested by researchers, or we've been trying to test them. So let me show you another study that's one of my favorite studies that I call the cold virus study. And that's a picture of the rhinovirus, the cold virus right there for you to see. Lovely. So in this study, volunteers were asked to come into the study, and their happiness was measured. And they all were administered the rhinovirus, the cold virus, directly into their noses. Okay, so this is not a study that maybe many of you would want to be in. So literally, kind of like when you travel in an airplane, there's these, we're told there are these viruses, either they're floating or they're sticky. Some people always get sick, right, when they travel, and some people never get sick. So maybe it has something to do with the strength of your immune system. So in this study, everyone was exposed to the cold virus. And so the question then is, we all have the cold virus in our bodies. Which one of us actually gets sick, and which one of us does not get sick and is able to fight it off? And by the way, the participants were compensated very well for being in this study. They were each paid $800 American to be in this study. And so they all got the cold virus into their nose, right, into their nasal passage. And then the researchers quarantined them in a motel, kind of like a jury being sequestered for 5 days. And they monitored them to see who developed symptoms of a cold. Are they coughing? Are they, do they have a runny nose? What is the level of the cold virus in their blood? And then they monitored them also for a month later. And so what they found was the happier people in the study were less likely to develop a cold. And when they did develop a cold, it lasted less long, which is kind of amazing. So again, it's a correlational study, but it suggests that happier people have stronger immune systems. There's now quite a few other studies that show similar things. So for example, another study by the same researcher, they looked at people who were receiving the hepatitis B vaccination, and happier people who received the Hep B vaccination showed a stronger immunoprotective response to that vaccination. So if you're happier, you're showing a stronger response. So pretty cool. Okay, so that's health. Now let's talk about work. Is happiness important in the workplace, in your career? It absolutely is. Lots of studies in this area. One sample study that I can tell you about. This was done in actually California, where I'm from. And it was done at a company, at an agency with employees who are mostly male, average 45 years old. And so in this study, the happiness was measured of all these employees, and then 3.5 years later, researchers came back and they asked the supervisors of the employees to rate them sort of overall in their work productivity and on various dimensions, like does this employee offer good ideas at work? Do they have high goals for their performance? Do they pay attention? You know, when you talk to them, do they work well as a team or work well with others? And what the study showed is that the happier employees, and again, remember the happiness was measured 3.5 years earlier, were rated as more positively on all of these dimensions. And lots of studies like this, and it's not just about ratings. Happier people, salespeople actually sell more, they produce more. So lots of research showing that happier people are more productive at work. This suggests that the 100 happiest people sitting in this room right now are going to be the most productive and most effective at their work in 3 years. Now, there's lots of ways of doing these studies. I've been telling you about correlational longitudinal studies. You can also do experiments, and you can try to induce happiness in the laboratory temporarily to see if even a temporary happy mood might influence your thinking or your behavior. And so this is a really nice study of creativity that was done with doctors. So the participants were all doctors. They were internists, and they came into the lab. Now, how would you, there's lots of ways that you can induce happiness temporarily, right? So one of the most effective ways is to give people chocolate and candy. Okay. So in this study, they brought these doctors into the laboratory and they gave them like a gift of candy and chocolate. Now, it was wrapped in a cellophane package so they could see it, but they couldn't eat it until after the study was over because the researchers didn't want the kind of like the physiological effects of actually eating to interfere with the study. And they also had to exclude certain people from the study. Can you guess who they were? Dieters, right. So people who are on a diet, and also diabetics too, but dieters could not be in the study, right? Because if you're dieting, getting a gift of chocolate might actually make you unhappy, right? So that's not going to work. So they had people who were giving this gift. They also had a neutral condition where people were not given a gift. And so then they gave these doctors a test of creativity. Now, how do you measure creativity? Again, there's lots of different ways. One popular way is something called the remote associates test, where you give people a whole bunch of items. You give them, and each item consists of 3 words, and you have to find a 4th word that kind of fits this list. A 4th word that you can put together with each of the 3 words to create a new word. Okay, so who is really happy today who might know the answer to this particular item? Apple. All right, got it? So it's crab apple, applesauce, and pineapple. And so there's lots of these items. Actually, when you get them, it seems almost obvious, but they're actually pretty hard. Lots of these items, and the idea is the quicker you can do this test and solve these items, and the more you do them, the more creative and flexible is your thinking. And researchers found that indeed the participants who were put in a happy mood temporarily did better on this test. They showed greater creativity on this little test. And again, I think that's kind of amazing because all that happened is they got a gift of chocolate, right? So just having this transient, short-term positive mood made people or caused people to be more creative. Some people think that transient moods are not important. They're kind of trivial. But lots of research, including by Barb Fredrickson, who was here last year, was one of my best friends, shows that even transient positive emotions can have long-term, durable, important positive consequences. So we shouldn't. They're also important. Even transient moods are very important. Okay, so there's lots of these studies of the benefits of happiness. We know that happier people have more friends and more social support. We know that happier people are more generous. So we were interested in, does this work the other way around? If we got people to try to be more generous, would they become happier and would they get more friends? So let me tell you about a study we did with my grad students in the beautiful city of Vancouver. So we went to 11 different classrooms with 4th and 5th and 6th grade students. 19 classrooms in 11 schools. And what we did is half of the classrooms, we asked these kids to do 3 acts of kindness per week for a period of 4 weeks. Okay, so 3 acts of kindness every week for a period of 4 weeks. That's 12 acts of kindness total. And then we had a control group, which we called the whereabouts group. And this group just reported on 3 places that they went each week for a period of 4 weeks. And I'll show you kind of what it looked like. So this is an actual response from a kid in the acts of kindness group. So this is a girl. What did she do that week? She vacuumed the floor. She cleaned the dining table. And my favorite, hugging my mom when she's stressed by her job. That was her act of kindness. So anyway, all these kids wrote in kind of what they did. And then here's an example of the whereabouts group. So this kid went to the Richmond Shopping Center, and then he went to track and swimming at Hillcrest. So he did sort of 3 things. They were all positive things. So, and what we found was that the kids who did acts of kindness, they got happier over time, which is what we expected. But not only did they become happier, they became more popular with their classmates. So we did a measure, we administered a measure of what's called peer acceptance, and this is a commonly used measure where every kid in every classroom is asked to nominate other kids in that classroom who they'd like to play with or do activities with. And the idea is that the more times you're nominated, the more accepted you are, the more popular you are. And so what we found was, this is a histogram that showed an increase in the number of nominations from before to after this 4-week study. And you see the kids in the acts of kindness group actually got 1.5 more nominations after they did acts of kindness than before. And I should mention that the acts of kindness were almost all done at home, like you saw in that example. So it wasn't just that they were helping each other in the classroom and other kids liked them more. They came back into the classroom and something rubbed off on them. Maybe they seemed more positive, happier, more confident, and other kids liked them more after they did acts of kindness. It's like they made 1.5 more friends after that study. So I think that shows the importance of introducing what are called pro-social activities into classrooms, into workplaces that might increase peer acceptance, might reduce bullying, et cetera. Okay, so that's one of the studies we've done. And so I hope that I've convinced you that most people around the world want to be happy, and that happiness is a good thing. It's not just about pleasure or feeling good. That if you're happy, all kinds of good things will come to you. And so the question that I've been trying to address in my work for the last 20 years is it possible to become happier? Now, you might think that's a silly question, and you're here at this conference probably because you do think it's possible to become happier. But actually, scientists have been pessimistic about this question for a long time. And so the reason that there's sort of been 3 reasons for pessimism. This is actually one of my kids. I'll explain why I have a picture of her. And so one reason is research from the field of behavior genetics shows that there's a genetic component to happiness. And we all know this to be true. When we look around us, some people are just naturally happier than others. Those of you who have more than one child might acknowledge that some of your kids, you feel like you raised them in the same way, same household, and yet some are happier than others. So this is my 2-year-old, my youngest, and she's a very happy kid, but not all of my kids are sort of equally happy. So we know this to be true, that some of us are sort of born with a higher happiness set point. So for some people, it used to mean that there's not a lot we can do to become happier because there's sort of this big genetic component to it. We also know that happiness is part of our personality. It's a lifelong trait. And we also know that personality is really hard to change over time. Back to those yearbook, remember the yearbook photos I mentioned? Go back to your high school or college class and think about like the most extroverted people or the most neurotic people or the most open people in your class. They're probably today at your reunion, 5, 10, 30 years later, they're probably still going to be the most extroverted, the most neurotic, the most open. This is called rank order stability. It doesn't change much over time. And so if happiness is part of your personality, then maybe it's very hard to change. So that gives us that's a source of pessimism. And finally, and this is something that I describe in my book, The Myths of Happiness, and I'm going to talk about it a lot more tomorrow at my workshop, there's a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. I mentioned this at our panel yesterday. And so hedonic adaptation is the phenomena that human beings are very good at adapting or getting used to changes in their lives, especially positive changes. So studies show, for example, that people get married and they have a huge boost in happiness, but then after that, they go back to their previous baseline. And any guesses how long it takes people to go back to their previous baseline after marriage? I think someone said 1 month. Yeah. There's a pessimist out there. So the average is 2 years. It's an average. Some people never go back. Those are the ones you want to study, right? The ones that get married, they get happier and they stay happier. But the point is that if we adapt to almost every positive change in our lives, then how can we become happier? So that's a question that I've been dealing with in a lot of my work. Okay, so those are sources of pessimism, but I wouldn't be here today if I didn't think that they can all be challenged. And my argument in a nutshell is that despite the finding that happiness is partially influenced by genetics, and despite the finding that our life circumstances, like how healthy we are, whether we're married, where we live, sort of has a surprisingly small effect on our happiness because of hedonic adaptation, still a large portion of our happiness is under our control. And so I often show this pie chart. I actually, I don't know, sometimes I don't show it because people often misinterpret it. The numbers in this pie chart are really, really rough estimates, so don't take them too seriously. But the idea here is when you ask the question, what determines happiness, what determines sort of what accounts for individual differences in happiness, about 50% of that is genetics. So when I ask the question, people sitting in this room, you all differ in how happy you are. Why are you different? Well, 50% of the reason for those differences is genetic. About 10% is life circumstances, assuming that you have a normal, kind of comfortable life. And that leaves about 40% for either measurement error or what I call intentional activity. So the idea is that there is room for happiness to change, to improve. So again, don't get stuck at that number, the 40%. It's a very, very rough estimate. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's 20%, maybe it's 35, maybe it's 45. But the idea is that there is like a pretty substantial proportion of happiness that is under our control, that is under our power to change. And that's what I do in my research, is kind of try to find out how do we harness that part of our happiness that we can control. And so there's lots of strategies that people can use to become happier. You all know about many of them, probably hundreds. And so these are just some examples that have been supported by research that happier people are more optimistic, they're more likely to meditate, they're more likely to exercise, they're more likely to be forgiving. And so what I do in my work is I try to test these strategies, not all of them, but some of them, in a systematic, scientific way. And so what we do, we call positive interventions. And an intervention is basically an experiment in which people are instructed to change themselves to sort of result in a positive change. So positive interventions are kind of like clinical trials. They're not technically clinical trials, but they're similar in that when you do a clinical trial, you might be testing, like, is a particular drug effective? And you might ask questions like, well, what is the appropriate dosage of the drug? And should some people not take the drug? And should it not be combined with other drugs? And so that's the kind of thing we ask in our research. So what is the proper dosage for gratitude? And should gratitude not be done by certain people? And I'll tell you about some of those studies in a minute. Okay, so different kinds of happiness interventions we've conducted, usually over the course of 4 to 12 weeks. We ask people to try a new happiness strategy, and we follow them across time. So we've asked people to count their blessings, to affirm their most important values, to savor and replay their happy days. I was on the Today Show in the United States talking about the Live Your Life Like It's Their Last Month one, this one. And that's a really cool one. We did a study where we asked people, okay, imagine that a month from now, you're moving away. You're moving somewhere far away. You're not sure when you're coming back. And so live your life like it's your last month, at your current sort of city location. And we found that people really did live their lives differently. They were more likely to see their friends and family. They took their favorite hikes. They went to their favorite restaurants. We also discovered that there was an increase in one-night stands among the subjects. So we didn't expect that necessarily. These were young college students. So anyway, so we've done lots of studies like this. And I'm going to show you I'm going to tell you very, very briefly about some of the studies. At my workshop tomorrow, I'm going to go through some of the same material and, of course, more material in a lot more detail, a lot slower. And so I'm a basic scientist, so the question that I ask in my research is basically how and why do these happiness strategies work? And sort of what is the secret to their success? What are the factors that underlie their effectiveness? And so, for example, and by the way, some of you or many of you might know some of these studies, but again, I'll sort of review them. So we did the very first positive intervention that we've ever done is we asked people to count their blessings for a period of 6 weeks. So every week, we asked people to write down what they're grateful for, up to 5 things that they're grateful for. Except we varied how often they did it. So here we were interested in the role of dosage, right? So we varied whether people counted their blessings once a week or 3 times a week. And so these are histograms showing increases or decreases in gratitude and happiness from before to after the 6-week intervention. And so you see that when you look at changes in gratitude, if you count your blessing once a week, you become more grateful over time. And also if you count your blessings once a week, you become happier over time relative to the control group. If you do it 3 times a week, nothing happens, no change. And so we were very interested in that finding. Maybe counting your blessings 3 times a week is too much. It becomes kind of a burden or a chore. Or maybe it backfires because it's hard for you to think of things to be grateful for when you do it too often. And so you might conclude, gee, maybe there's nothing I'm grateful for. We actually are testing that in a study that we're running right now. But anyway, so that's a study that highlights the importance of dosage. So I'm going to show you sort of the slide repeatedly, kind of what factors are important in implementing positive activities in the most optimal ways. And so the first one is dosage, sort of how often, how much do you practice it. Now, when I talk about kind of counting your blessings, some people come up to me and they say, I don't know, I would never be caught, with a gratitude journal in my hand. I think counting blessings is trivial and kind of hokey and trite. And some people tell me, well, I count my blessings every morning, and that really works for me. And so that seems to counter the results of the study that I just showed, but it doesn't really, because my research also shows that what's really important about practicing happiness activities or strategies is fit, is that you have to find the activity that fits your personality, that fits your goals, that fits your strengths, or fits the source of your unhappiness if you are unhappy. And so, for example, I have a colleague who would never, ever keep a gratitude journal, but he discovered that writing emails to some important people in his life, like former mentors, parents, was very meaningful. And so there's sort of different ways of expressing gratitude. You can write, you can share it with others, you can use an app, you can use a website. So there's different, you just have to sort of find the right way to practice your strategy. The fit is really important. We also found that motivation is important. So here's a study we did where we had people in the study who were motivated to become happier. We asked them, do you want to be happier? Come be in our study. And then we had people in the study who were not particularly motivated to become happier. And in this study, we asked people to write gratitude letters once a week for a period of 8 weeks. And we also had an optimism intervention where we asked people to imagine their best possible self 10 years from now, once a week over a course of 8 weeks, and write about it. Like, my best possible self in my career, my best possible self in my relationships, my health, etc. And so what we found was that if you're not motivated, you actually did not become happier. You actually got a little less happy over time. But if you're motivated, you got happier over time. Even 6 months after the study was over, people were still happier. And so that just shows, maybe that's kind of obvious, but it's a lot of times psychologists have to kind of confirm the obvious, that if you want to become happier, you have to be motivated, committed, dedicated to it, although not too dedicated. You don't want to be obsessed with it. And also, you have to have fit, right? Find a strategy that matters for you, that you find meaningful, and that you can internalize, identify with. We've also looked at the importance of social support. And so I'm a runner, and in the morning, I have a buddy that I run with. And so I set out my clothes before I go to bed, and I wake up and it's really, really early, the alarm goes off, and I don't want to get out of bed, but I know that she's going to be waiting for me on a street corner in Santa Monica And she's going to be really upset if I'm not there, because I'm sure she's feeling the same way about waking up. And so having that buddy really, really helps maintain my exercise routine. And same thing with happiness, right? So having a buddy or your family member supporting you is important. So in this study, we asked people over the course of 4 weeks to do that best possible self-intervention. So every week you write about your best possible self in different domains of your life. And the control group actually got less happy over time. If you have no social support, but you just do this optimism intervention, you get happier. But if you have social support, again, if you have family members, friends that are supporting you, encouraging you, helping you sort of get through obstacles, then you become even happier, right? So that's the importance, that shows the importance of social support for the pursuit of happiness. Okay, I'm also interested in culture. I think there's some really fascinating cultural differences in the pursuit of happiness, and not much time to talk about it today. But I'll tell you about one study we did where we have a collaboration at Seoul National University in South Korea. So we compared students in Seoul and students in UC Riverside, where I teach. And in this study, students wrote gratitude letters each week for a period of 6 weeks, and they also did 3 acts of kindness each week. And this is what we found. So these are line graphs, so when they're going up, that means happiness is increasing. So for the United States, students who wrote gratitude letters, they got happier over time, and students who did acts of kindness got happier over time. So that's to be expected. That's what we expected to find. But look what happened in South Korea. Really interesting. So South Korean students who did acts of kindness, they got happier, but South Korean students who wrote gratitude letters did not get happier, actually got a little bit less happy over time. And so we were very interested in this finding. I actually was giving, right around that time that I got this result, I was giving a talk for the Ministry of Education in Seoul. They were trying to implement what they call happiness education into their schools. They have a lot of stress and actually a high suicide rate in the high schools because of that really stressful culture, academic culture. And so they said to me, well, expressing gratitude is kind of a mixed experience in Korea, that when you express gratitude, the other person is expected to reciprocate. You might feel indebted or guilty when you express gratitude. And I actually have followed this up in other countries as well. It's very, very interesting. I actually find gratitude extremely interesting because it's not always pleasant, right? When you acknowledge that someone else is partly responsible for your success or your happiness, it makes you feel more humble. It makes you feel maybe indebted. You feel like you need to pay back. Maybe it makes you feel guilty that you have not proven yourself worthy yet of your benefactor. And so gratitude can be kind of a mixed emotional experience, but also it can motivate you and prompt you to work harder and do better. So we actually are doing a bunch of studies right now sort of testing that question. So I think it's a very, very interesting construct, gratitude. Now, we also looked at the importance of culture right there. We also looked at effort. So the more effort people put in to writing gratitude letters or trying to be optimistic or doing acts of kindness, the more they benefit. And so in the very same study, we coded how much effort people were putting into their kindness and gratitude activities. So the red line is people who put a lot of effort got a lot happier. If you put medium effort, you get a little happier, and you put low effort, you don't get happier. So again, kind of an obvious finding, but it's a very, very nice result showing how important it is to put effort into the pursuit of happiness. The same result with the Korean students, but just weaker because you saw that they did not benefit as much from the intervention. And so again, this shows the importance of effort. And just kind of overall, it highlights one of the basic kind of take-home messages from my research, which is that happiness takes work. Just like anything in life, your marriage, your career, raising kids, becoming fit or losing weight, they all take work, including the pursuit of happiness. So where are we going now with our research? What's next? We've run about 24 happiness interventions. We're running about half a dozen as we speak. Still trying to ask the question, how do positive activities work? So some relevant questions we ask are, does age matter? So we've done studies with kids, and looks like age does not matter much. Kids seem to benefit just as much as adults. We did a study with teenagers, with 800 teenagers in the United Kingdom, and we were worried about the teenagers because we thought, wow, teenagers are the most ungrateful people in the world, right? Are they going to enjoy, writing gratitude letters? But actually they did. It's like they recognized that they were ungrateful and they wanted to become more grateful. Older people, you may know, are actually happier than younger people on average. Older people are emotionally wiser. It's like they know what makes them happy and they do that. They spend time with people who make them happy. Younger people are more likely to take risks, which is important. That's part of what you're supposed to be doing when you're young, taking risks and exploring your identity, exploring your interests and values. So older people are a little happier than younger people. We've also asked the question about whether these positive activities can alleviate depressive symptoms. And there's really kind of two ways you can look at it. You might wonder whether depressed individuals might benefit more from these kinds of happiness interventions that I've shown you, in part because it's a floor effect. They have more room to improve, in part because presumably they're more motivated to improve. But maybe they might benefit less because when you can't get off the couch, you're not going to go out doing acts of kindness. And the answer really is both. Research shows that some studies show that if you ask depressed individuals to perform like really simple activities, like think about 3 good things that happened today, they're more likely to benefit. But we actually did a study where we asked depressed college students to write gratitude letters, and they actually got less happy. We had to stop the study, and what we found was that they felt guilty. They would say, I don't have anything to be grateful for. They found it really, really hard to do that exercise. And so we have to really tailor these activities, again, kind of as a supplement to professional treatment so that they're effective in clinical populations. We're also, I mentioned this study yesterday at the panel. We've done studies at workplaces like at Coca-Cola in Madrid, where we found that when people help their colleagues at the workplace, not only do they benefit by becoming happier and more connected to others, but they sort of prompt everyone in the workplace to pay it forward, to do more acts of kindness. We've also done studies where we've had people wear these badges which send infrared signals to one another, so we can see who's talking to who's interacting with whom. And also they have accelerometers that measure movement, so we can see if people are kind of moving more or differently after a happiness intervention relative to before. So for example, we did a study in Japan, in Tokyo, where we asked people, I'll end with this study. We asked the employees of a big engineering company there for every week for 6 weeks to write down 3 things that went well at work. So really simple. Every week, you can all try this on Friday, write down 3 things that went well at work. And then the control group wrote down 3 tasks that they completed at work. And so you write down those things and sort of why did they go well. And what we found was that people who wrote down 3 good things, they got happier, they felt more connected and engaged in the workplace, but also, remember they were wearing these badges that trace their movements? They actually had more physical energy when they were in the office. They were moving more, which I think is really cool. So just thinking about 3 good things at work made you more active, more physically active as well. So I'm gonna sort of end by, I guess, reiterating that I think happiness is really important. It's not just about feeling good. Happier people are better leaders, they have better relationships, they're healthier, they're more creative, they make more money. But it's not easy to become happier. Happiness takes work. If you want to be happy, if you want to help other people become happy, you have to kind of begin today, act now, put the effort into it. I always like to end with a quote from Aristotle, one of my heroes, from 2,000 years ago, who kind of summarized the gist of my research, which is that happiness depends upon ourselves. Thank you.